My mother was a yeller. Okay, yeah, sure, she peppered in the occasional beating, to keep us on our toes, but mostly she yelled at us for everything. She yelled at me for things I hadn't done. I don't care if you were not the one who actually shot the hole in the kitchen window. That doesn't mean it was not your fault. She yelled at me for things I hadn't even thought about doing. Don't you dare ask me to buy you a car. Yes, I know you're 8 years old, but I want you to know now that I will never buy you a car. She yelled at me for things I didn't know I could do. Don't you look at me in that tone of voice, young lady. I got used to the yelling, but I'll never forget the day she did not yell and how it was almost somehow worse. That day had started off like any other of my great 4-year-old days, watching my favorite TV show, Mr. Rogers. Now, before the show was over, before he left the neighborhood, he would always show you one last activity so you could practice it until you met him again the next morning. That's the kind of guy he was. And on this day, he had placed a small glass of orange juice on top of a small round tray, and with an agility you wouldn't necessarily expect from a man wearing a yellow cardigan sweater, he did this figure-8 move and came up without spilling a drop. Easy enough. Well, certainly easier than yesterday's sock puppets. But I wanted to practice it to make sure I got it perfect before I showed my mom. So I crept into the kitchen, no small shot glass, but I found a nice big unbreakable plastic glass. That'll work. Couldn't find any orange juice, but grape juice, and juice is juice, right? Poured it up to the brim. I knew we didn't have any of those cute small round trays, so I got the big family rectangular dinner tray. Now, I went into the living room, in spite of my mother's warnings that the living room was not to be lived in. Only cleaned. But I needed the space, the maneuverability, and I knew I'd be out of there in a flash, so she'd never know. And I was feeling really good about the whole experience until the very first flick of my wrist sent the cup into its downward death fall. And it went down clean, like an Olympic diver. It didn't splatter. It just left this one shockingly purple stain in the center of my mother's gold shag carpet. No. I knew it would be worse if she discovered it on her own, so I ran into her room and I said, Mom, Mr. Rogers, and no orange juice on the carpet. The carpet! And she ran beyond me. And by the time I caught up with her in the living room, she was kneeling over the spot like you would a dead child. And I braced for the yelling, the screaming, the beating. But she didn't say anything. And when she got up, I could see she hadn't been crying. Her face was expressionless. And she walked past me without saying a word. And then she came back with something in her hand. Was it a belt, a whip? No. It was a black permanent magic marker. And she got down again on her knees. And she circled the spot and drew a little arrow to it. And then she wrote in black permanent marker on the shag, Mr. Rogers did this. She proceeded again to walk past me, still not saying a word. She unplugged and hefted this giant TV out of our dining room, walked out to the car. Then she came back in for the TV in the bedroom and went out again without saying a word and left me, her 4-year-old daughter, alone for the very first time. I didn't know what had happened when she came back. She had no TV. And I said, how will I watch Mr. Rogers? And she said, you won't. He's a dangerous influence. I said, but Mom. And then she threw this big black book at my feet, and she screamed, choke on that, you savage. And I smiled, not because I was looking forward to reading the Holy Bible, but because my mom, the yeller I knew and loved, was back. Thank you.